You see, something is going to happen. Something wonderful.
My God, it's full of stars.
Welcome to the Occult Rejects. This episode, I got one of my partners in crime with me. I got Teresa from the Spiritual Gangsters. What is going on? How are you?
I am well. How are you?
Awesome. Very well, very well. And thank you for jumping on and co-hosting.
Yeah, I'm very excited.
Yes, yes. And then I get to see you again tomorrow, too, with Oddman.
I know.
3 times
crazy.
in 1 week. What's going on?
Back to back.
But thanks again. And I really did, like, when I finally got Phil to come on for this topic, instead of waiting for Colby, unfortunately, sorry, Colby, I couldn't wait. It's been by almost a year by now. I was like, I know she'll definitely like this topic. I mean, plus, we're both Italian, so how could we not? So
I know, Sicilian to boot. So,
yes, exactly.
You know,
both of us. Yeah.
Danger. There we go. No, I'm kidding.
But yeah, and enough about that. And just real quick to let the people know for the links for her show for Clown World, that is in the Spiritual Gangsters, that is down on the bottom in the show notes already. And just a reminder, every Tuesday at 10:30 a.m. we go live, so check it out. Yes. And now to the guest, my man Phil, a fellow Long Islander. What is going on? How are you?
Not much. I'm doing good. How are you guys doing?
Great. Smoking my blunt, and you're drinking your beer, so I think it's a good time so far. And she's got a Perrier.
The mom of the group is like, sorry.
Have to be the responsible one. She's a designated driver.
Yeah, exactly.
But Phil, is there any? I mean, besides, I guess I know I've had you on for Danny Castellaro, so I mean, I could promote that, but I mean that's my own show. But if there's any other shows or any links that you might want to even give out or anything that you want to share or promote. Because I know you've been on other shows too, I think. So.
Yeah, I actually did. Who was it? I did Secret Society Good Guys about a couple months ago. Cheney and Wonderland show, and we actually did talk a little bit about the mob. So that was kind of something else that I did. And obviously I spoke to you about Danny Castellaro. I did Colby's show. Oh, wow, it's been over a year and a half where we did the Clinton body count.
Yes, I think I remember hearing about you originally from that.
Right, yeah. Some serious gangsters there.
Oh, that was 4 hours. That was a 4-hour show. I mean, we were exhausted after that one. Whoa. Yeah, that was a good show.
Would you ever want to revisit that? I mean, you don't have to do a 4-hour show. We could break it up. But I mean, would you ever? Because I might be interested in doing that just for like shits and giggles, really.
Yeah, no, totally would love to do that. Well, it's funny enough. This week, someone just came up, kind of tangentially connected. There was a former WWF wrestler, what's his name? Billy Jack Haynes, who got arrested. They had a standoff with the cops, and they found his wife dead in the house. And he had said he was on the tracks with the boys on the tracks murder in Arkansas, the 2 high school kids whose death was connected to the Clintons and the Mena, Arkansas, drug running and all that stuff.
Wow.
Wrestler.
Yeah. I mean, they said in the end he probably was just kind of blowing smoke, but between the cocaine and CTE, who knows where his brain was. But I said I could always do the Clintons. I think that they're always interesting, and let's face it, they are organized crime. I
mean,
politics is, but the Clintons definitely.
They definitely have they're organized. They got their shit together for sure.
Oh God, yeah.
There was even stuff. Not to get off topic, but I mean, then we'll get to the Mafia. But like, there was even, I think, things that I had no idea. Like even J.J. Vance was, I think, showing that technically, I don't even think they actually have like any tax exempt status, but they claim to. There's something that basically that Clinton Foundation is claiming something it's not, and nobody ever really questions. They just take their word for it. They're putting in some kind of tax I think J.J. Vance took the tax identification number or something, or like the EIN number of the LLC or whatever it's supposed to be that they use, and then ran it to find the actual company, and the company does not come up if you run it through that number. So it's not matching the company, but yet that's the one you gave them.
Some fishy stuff.
Yeah, it's really interesting. Not to get off the topic, but so yeah, we got Phil on for the Mafia, and again, I thought that would be a great topic for all of us to talk about, and it's something that's interesting to me, and figured to be, interesting, but not so deep and heady as my other topics. And it's something I can actually enjoy and not have to stress myself out on.
Right.
So, Phil, I guess you can take it away because I really don't know where you want to start off with this.
Well, it was funny. Just before I came on, Goodfellas was on
nice.
AMC. Like clockwork, you know. I mean, like the way Shawshank Redemption is on pretty much every other night.
Yo, that's on there a lot, isn't it?
Oh my God, Shawshank is on.
I have noticed that.
Yeah, it's on a lot.
You'll see it like at least once a week if you pass the channel.
Yeah.
That's funny.
So, you know, I was born and raised in Long Beach, and you know, Long Beach is where The Godfather was set in the book, and they make a reference to it in the movie. Small. They didn't want the movie shot on location in Long Beach because, according to the people, you know, some of the citizens, they didn't want that element there. Now, I don't know if that meant Hollywood or if that meant organized crime, but there were gangsters who lived, you know, Long Beach is kind of broken up. You have the East End, where I grew up, the center of town, which is like City Hall, the police department. And then you have the West End, which can be anywhere between like these small houses all kind of like grouped together, or like these large $1 million homes. And, you know, a lot of those houses took a hit during Sandy, but I've seen through a couple of books. One of them was a book. It was the Federal Bureau of Narcotics list of like top drug dealing gangsters from like back in the day. And it was on Amazon, but I got it from like my local library or whatnot. And it showed where a lot of these guys like had summer homes or, you know, occasional homes. And a few of them were out in Long Beach, you know, back in the day. So, and Tommy Gambino, son of Carlo Gambino, who was a huge garment center. He was big in the garment center rackets, you know, suits and all that stuff. He lived in Lido Beach, which is the town right over from Long Beach. Tommy Lucchese, who was his father-in-law and was also one of the original like big name five family bosses, lived there. They chronically mispronounce the Lido Beach on TV. They keep calling it Lido Beach, which pisses me off. Not as much as Appalachian, you know, the town where they busted the mob meeting, but close enough. So yeah, the city has, you know, a little bit of history with that. I've been interested in the Mafia probably since the first time I saw The Godfather. And you see that life, but you know there's more to it. You know, like in The Godfather, it seems to be just about like the family, you know? And then when you read your first mob book or like even read it, you know, a couple newspaper articles, you see there's so much more to it. You know, it's a life that really is about taking, you know, an oath of silence, you know, omerta, and, you know, once you're in, you're in. You know, they say the only way you leave is feet first. You know, so I mean, not everybody gets that sort of what's the word I want to use? You don't get a retirement plan.
No.
You know, your retirement plan is pretty set. You know, you either get one in the back of the head, or you know, you wind up doing the rest of your life behind bars. It's, you know, it's not always the glamour that they portray.
Yeah.
So.
I think there was a lot of spots on Long Island, especially in Nassau County, that I think there was a lot of mafia, I think, back in the day.
Yeah.
I mean, I think like in the Massapequa area, I think at one point was like even kind of known. And I mean, I know people, like, not personally, but like people that, in my opinion, what they used to do back in the day was organized crime. Like even like over by where I live, like not too far from like, you know, Woodbury or Plainview and shit like that. There was people who, you know, into sanitation.
Sanitation.
Yeah, so I mean,
that's what Tony Soprano was in.
Yes, yes.
Sanitation.
I can't with that show.
Yeah,
honestly.
It was so funny too. Like when I, you know, first met these people, I was like, of course, in sanitation. Like what the, like how typical are you trying to get? Like you trying to get caught? Like what the
yeah,
fuck?
like the stereotype holds true. You're like, oh, wow.
Like you like it was like a diamond in the rough. It was like one of the only sanitation people, probably never to get busted.
Well, my cousin, my second cousin, was in a bunch of different jobs, but he at one point had his own, sanitation route or whatnot, his own business, and the mob was basically pressuring him to either join or sell out. And in the end, he's like, this isn't worth it. He sold out. He eventually opened a restaurant out on the eastern end of the island called Johnny Marlin's, which was out in Montauk, and safer route in the long run. And it's funny, you mentioned Massapequa. I believe Roy DeMeo, who was one of the more notorious of the Gambinos, lived in Massapequa. His crew, which was involved in a high stakes like car theft ring, has been accused of killing up to like 250 people. And they were a crew that even scared John Gotti. And, DeMeo was a butcher's apprentice at one point, and he would use that when his crew, which operated out of the Gemini Lounge in, I believe it was Canarsie, when they would get rid of a body, they'd call it doing the Houdini. And they would, one of the guys would, shoot one of them, put a towel over their head, they'd stab them, then they would hang the body upside down over like a few towels in this bathroom they had, let the body drain out, then they chop up the body, and then basically get it packaged up to be wound up going in the, I think it was the Fountain Avenue landfill. And yeah, I mean, they said at least 250, they think. And one of the guys is getting out. One of the guys is getting paroled.
That's crazy.
Which I'm stunned by. I'm like, I don't know how life managed to get, 30 years. So
You're supposed to just like stick him in the neck and hang him upside down and let him bleed out, so people think it was a vampire.
Well,
one of
the blood, right?
One of the guys in the crew's nickname was Dracula.
Stop.
Yeah. Swear to God.
I say that because of that guy. I forgot his name. The guy I covered who did some shit like that in the Philippines. Wow.
Oh, it's a Philippines thing.
Yeah.
But there was a guy. There was a guy in the military, Lansdale, Edward Lansdale.
Yes. Yeah. It was him. It was him. Yeah.
Ed Lansdale. Yep.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it still blows me away. I know I mentioned it a few times, even recently. It's just like, how does that work? Like, I don't know. Like you. Damn.
Yeah.
You got these people really believing that shit. Damn.
That's wild.
I mean, you think military and even organized crime sometimes not that far off.
No, I don't think so. Really. I mean, look, they all have their
pecking order.
Yeah. I have.
Exactly.
I didn't like not to like get off the topic with the mafia, but like I do think it's very much even secret society organized in a sense too.
Yeah.
It's very much like that, I think. I mean, you got to be a made man, and like the silence, in order. It just seems very much like secret society to me.
Yeah. No, definitely. I mean, and you even think of, so no one knew in terms of the mafia. I mean, they had hinted about it, the name had been called, but Joe Valachi, when Joe Valachi went in front of a Senate committee in 1963, he was the first person to kind of reveal the inner workings of, a national crime syndicate. And he only had an education that I think wasn't even above grade school. And he, he talks about the initiation of being a made man and, get your finger pricked and, the blood and the image of the saint and, burning it in your hand and you got to cup it and, that you'll burn like that image if you ever, rat on anybody. And the interesting thing I've read about that, now I've read Valachi's book, the Valachi Papers, was he didn't know really much outside of New York. He was a New York guy. There was a book, Deal with the Devil, by a guy named Peter Lance that talks about the FBI's arrangement with a guy named Greg Scarpa, who was in the Colombo family, one of the biggest informants. And that Scarpa was the one who provided the information that had been attributed to Valachi. So Valachi didn't give up everything. Like there was other information there that it was Scarpa.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Hmm. Phil, I was gonna ask you. So you studied, I guess, mostly American mafia.
I mean, I've mostly, but I've read some stuff about the Sicilian mob too.
Yeah, I was gonna ask, like, in your research, like, if you've come across like the connections, is it similar to like how it operates in Sicily here in North America, or is it very different?
Um, in Sicily, they had, I think it was called like, instead of the commission, it was like the cupola. So like a similar version of it, but it was kind of not as. So like the American National Commission is basically the five families of New York, but you had like Buffalo, you had Chicago with the outfit. The outfit's very powerful. In Sicily, it was like some of the closer clans, but for the most part, they were never really that close. They were more always warring.
Yeah, like territorial and stuff.
Oh yeah, so like one of the most territorial in Sicily is the Corleonesi. The Corleonesi, who are kind of like ridiculed as being the country bumpkins, are also like the craftiest. Those are the ones who will not only kill you, they will go after your entire family.
Right.
Yeah, I mean that's what led to. They talk about the two great mafia wars. One was in the '60s, and one was in the '80s. The one that was in the '80s, I think, left like several thousand dead. Whoa. And yeah, it ended. I mean, because you had the families warring against each other, but you also had law enforcement being targeted, and really that kind of ended. You had the Maxi trial, which was this huge, I mean, the commission trial in New York was big, the one that Giuliani brought. The Maxi trial was 300 mafiosi in a specially constructed courtroom that was basically like in a bunker to prevent any sort of terrorist attacks from happening. And I think out of 300 that were tried, I want to say over 270 were convicted. But the people who brought the charges, Giovanni Falcone and Paolo Borsellino, would be dead within 5 years. Car bombs.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah.
Makes
it very intimidating to go up against them, right? Because something's probably going to happen to you.
Yeah. Well, you even had. In the late 70s, early 80s, you started having some of these Sicilians come over to the United States, but they were always called Zips, was that like their nickname.
I've heard that, actually.
What does that mean?
I think it was like how they spoke, but it was also kind of like a little bit of a mocking name to it too. But there was the Gambinos had, excuse me, cousins. One guy was named Rosario Gambino. They were all out of Cherry Hill, New Jersey, and they were big heroin dealers. Like heroin was the big thing that kind of started. You started seeing more of these Sicilians pop up, and which eventually would lead to the pizza connection case, which was all these pizza parlors in New York. So I think there might have been a couple in New Jersey, Philly. I think there was even one in like some sort of like hick area of like Illinois. And they were running heroin, through these pizza parlors.
Out of pizza places.
Yeah. And
it's the most Italian thing ever.
Well, one of the people who kind of was a huge heroin dealer was Carmine Galante, who was like the acting boss of the Bonanno family. And he thought having all these Sicilians around was good for him until he kind of got a little too greedy. And he was also a little bit too crazy too. They took him out in July '79 at the behest of, it was actually a hit ordered by the heads of the five families. That would be one of the murders that they'd be charged for in the commission trial about 6 years later, was Carmine Galante's murder. And his Sicilian bodyguards turned on him awfully quick. So,
oh, wow.
Yeah. No loyalty whatsoever.
No, often. Well, they're supposed to be, though, right? Supposed to take all these oaths and pledge all these.
I don't know so much about the Sicilians, or at least the Sicilians when it came to being stateside.
Maybe they felt less loyal because they were out of their own element, perhaps, and they're just like, well, if you're gonna pay me more, I'm gonna do what you say. I guess. I don't know.
Well, it's fun.
I'm sorry. Oh, go ahead. No, it's fine.
It's just funny though, like when I talk about the initiation that Joe Belacci has spoken about, you don't hear about it with certain groups. Like you don't hear about it with the Chicago outfit. I don't think I've ever heard the initiation, someone becoming a made man, because that's a huge moment. There's a difference between when you're an associate of a family and when you become a made man. And you need to be, it used to be you needed to be 100% Italian. Now some say you need to be at least Italian on your mom's side, or, there's certain aspects to that have changed. And it used to be you had to, you needed to kill somebody. Now you could just be a good earner. And when you become a made man, you're supposed to be like untouchable, but that's not always true at all. I mean, you see that in Goodfellas. In Goodfellas, they kill the guy, Billy Batts, and the guy who kills him, Tommy DeSimone, he wasn't a made guy. He killed him, and in the end, that's one of the deaths he paid for.
Yeah.
So
that's wild.
But it's supposed to give you status. It's supposed to be able to kind of lift you up to a new realm and things.
Yeah, just like the secret societies, like you're saying.
Yep. I would think your paycheck probably goes up too, right?
I would think so. Yeah. Bigger piece of the pie, right?
Well, unless you see a movie like, Donnie Brasco. I think Donnie Brasco kind of gave that other side when you can be a guy like Al Pacino's character, Lefty Ruggiero, who was a made guy in the Bananos. And what does he cling to? He clings to the amount of guys he's killed and the fact that, I think he says something like, even a dog, the sun, even a dog gets a warm spot, every now and then, or something like that. Warm sun shines on a dog's ass one day or something, because he struggled. I said, you just need to, I think you need to find your niche. And that even happened in the Gambinos. Like Paul Castellano, when he got killed, there was two distinct factions in the Gambinos. You had your blue collar faction and you had your white collar faction. Your blue collar faction was the underboss, Neil Delacroce, and guys like John Gotti, the hijackers, the street guys. And then you had guys like Paul Castellano. Paul Castellano's taking meetings with Frank Perdue, the Chicken Man, and, all these things. And he's high society. He didn't even have a gun on him when he got killed outside of Sparks. They said he had become a businessman. That's not what, you like to think you're legitimate, but in the end, other people will handle things that are not, like a boardroom sort of, we expect your resignation. No, instead, John Gotti was like, take it right now, and he took it. There's a lot of things you could say about a guy like John Gotti. I said, he was a street guy, and some guys forget that. Paul Castellano forgot it and he paid for it.
That is a good point though, because a lot of times, they're like you. A lot of times, I feel like even some of the people that get glamorized and like everybody's like, "Oh, that was a big dude." It's like, no, he was just a big dude on the streets.
Yeah,
you know what I'm saying? Like your whole thing with Gotti, and it's like there was other people more important than him.
Oh yeah, I mean, Gotti. I don't even know in the end how many people he killed, as opposed to a guy like Sammy Gravano. I said, Sammy Gravano. Now, you look at Sammy Gravano now, and you're seeing a guy who's like riddled with, alopecia. It's what steroids does to you and everything else. But and now has YouTube videos and all this other stuff. But this is a guy who was like, he was a bull. I mean, that's literally. I mean, the nickname was very apt. And he had killed a handful of guys. Even in the end, I think pulled the trigger on his own brother-in-law because he was told he had to. And you get these guys, though, you wonder, like, how much is facade, like, oh, I've heard this about this guy. He's killed 5 guys with his bare hands. Or is it real, And it doesn't matter. Little, big, who knows? I mean, there was another Joe Pesci guy, Tony Spilotro, who Joe Pesci played in Casino. I mean, that guy was not a big guy. I mean, his nickname, he had 2 nicknames, the little guy, and the other one was the ant. And the ant was bestowed by the FBI because one of the guys called him a little piss ant. And Tony Spilotro killed at least 24 guys. And, he was a guy who did it with muscle and, he could pull the trigger pretty quick. And even that reputation went by the way of the Titanic when it came time to get rid of him because he was too high profile. And the Chicago outfit decided him and his brother had to go.
That's crazy.
And he knew he was going. And when it came out in 2007, I think it was the Family Secrets trial, they called it, because there had not been a lot of cooperating witnesses in respect to the Chicago outfit. Their reputation was earned. Not a lot of guys flipped or anything like that historically. They had I think it was like 1,900 gangland killings that were unsolved.
Wow.
Going back to like Capone time. And they get this guy, I want to say it was Nick Calabrese was the guy's name. Eventually testified against his dad and some other people. So that's kind of where the Family Secrets thing came in. And one of the guys they got was a guy named Joey the Clown Lombardo, who had been a top Chicago guy for years, going back to like Sam Giancana days. So like the golden era of the Chicago outfit. And one of the murders was Tony Spilotro and his brother Michael. And they had been called back to Chicago, and they go into someone's house, they're walking down the stairs, and they see all these guys there. And they know. And Spilotro's like, can we have a prayer? And just as quickly as he says that, they start beating on him. They beat both of them within an inch of their lives and then bury him in a cornfield. Just kind of like you see in Casino.
That just popped up in my head as you said that.
Yeah.
That's so wild.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see that too in The Godfather with like Michael Corleone, right? Because his character, he's a businessman, right?
Yeah.
He's the brains. He's in the movie. We only see him ever kill, I think, one person. No, maybe two. The first guy he kills and his brother. I think. No, he doesn't kill his brother.
He kills the police chief, the crooked police chief, and the guy Salazzo.
Yes.
And they actually had a fair amount they left out of the movie. They did the Godfather saga, which left scenes in. He finds the guy who set him up but kills his bride in Sicily, Apollonia. He finds that guy. He finds him, Fabrizio, and he kills him. He's working in a pizza parlor. That's in
his former bodyguard.
Yep.
In Sicily, right?
Yep. He shoots him himself. But yeah, other than that, Michael doesn't really get his hands dirty. It's more of someone like Sonny or, the guys like Clemenza, guys like that.
Yeah, as a business guy, he just orders other people around to do what he wants.
Yeah.
It's fascinating.
Never get your hands dirty. But then you get guys like John Francesi. His son Michael is the other guy who's very high profile in his post-mob life. But Sonny Francese lived to be about, and they still don't know because he lied about his age, but he lived to be over 100. What? And even in his 90s, he still was willing to go out and get his hands dirty. Yeah.
That's so wild.
Yeah, he was the original article, gangster-wise.
I have a few questions for you, Phil, if you don't mind. I just don't want to forget, and I hate to put you on the spot just in case you don't know it. Was there, well, a lot of these people who were in the Mafia back in the day, I mean, were they like actual legal citizens as well?
Some were, and some weren't. Like guys like Joe, one of the original guys, I think it was out of Jersey, but he was connected with a lot like the Lucianos and the Costellos. Joe Adonis, they deported him when they got him. I forget what they got him on, but his real last name was like Doto, D-O-T-O, and they deported him. Luciano they deported, but he was a citizen, but they deported him just based off of, it was kind of the agreement with him helping safeguard the docks during World War II. It was a deal, Office of Naval Intelligence, and I think even the OSS might have used Luciano. But yeah, that was the thing, was they let him out of jail early, but deported him. Carlos Marcello, the boss out of New Orleans, he was, I want to say Tunis originally. He was Italian. His real name was Calogero Minacor. And Bobby Kennedy had him kidnapped at a deportation hearing, and basically an early version of like renditioned, and left him and his lawyer in Guatemala. And Marcello got his way back, and they said later on one of the people who might have helped fly him back in was a guy named David Ferry. And David Ferry is big because, once again, Joe Pesci connection, and played in the movie JFK. He was later on one of the guys who was connected to Lee Harvey Oswald and a guy named Clay Shaw out of New Orleans. And Ferry had alopecia and had like glued on eyebrows. I think they were like carpet samples or something. And they even make reference to him in The Irishman.
Okay.
Yeah. Was he looking like a Quino with those eyebrows?
Oh, if you see the picture of, I mean, you see Joe Pesci play him, and then you see an actual picture of David Ferry. I said, David Ferry's an unusual looking guy. And later on they said, so that Ferry was in Oswald, they were in the Civil Air Patrol together. But later on, I read
the
that
Civil Air Patrol. Holy shit!
I'm looking him up right now.
I remember that shit back in the
what's
day.
his
They
name?
had one of those near me when I was a kid.
they said Barry Seal was in the Civil Air Patrol with them.
They had that MacArthur Airport over by me when I grew up. Holy shit!
Oh yeah, I just looked
so-
up how he looks. That's
So
funny.
another question.
Yeah.
All right, yeah. Oh, as far as I may be misunderstood, but I just want to make sure that this is correct. Now, like when these families basically they come over here from there, correct, and then start their operation technically under the umbrella of like another family or something. Is that
You
how?
mean Sicilians, or I mean?
Was there mafia here that really had literally no attachment? Like, aren't they normally sending money to someone back to Italy?
So someone like Joe Bonanno, I think his father was mobbed up, you know, like an early version. Like we had organized, well, we didn't have organized, we had disorganized crime here, you know, but it was nothing really concentrated. Everything was like, you had your 5 Points gangs, you had the gangs in New York, your Plug Uglies, Dead Rabbits, all those things. It kind of came out a little bit more organically, but you didn't really have families. So you probably just had some gangs and what here or not. But yeah, the establishment of the modern mafia in the United States was 1931. Was when it really that was when the commission, was organized. It was, I want to say it was in Atlantic City is where the formation came. And that was after they got rid of what they called the Mustache Pete's, the old school Sicilian bosses who had led this horrific war, the Castello Morese War, which was really overseen by two guys. It was Salvatore Maranzano and a guy named Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria. And it was just bad for business. I mean, you were basically talking about St. Valentine's Day over time, like spread out, like probably, if not a few dozen, probably like maybe 100 dead mafiosi left and right. But I'm just trying to think back to, because I read Bonanno's Man of Honor a long time ago. I don't know how much they were giving back. I'm sure that family-wise they were sending money back, but I don't think they were ever sent as representatives from anyone in Sicily so much. If anything like that might have happened, it probably might have happened after. There was a key meeting that Bonanno oversaw. Bonanno was almost kind of like a bridge between Sicily and the U.S. in certain aspects, because again, that's where a lot of those zips came from. But Joe Bonanno had been in a meeting in '57 where they were talking about eventually importing drugs. And before you had the pizza connection, you had the French connection, which was using the ports in Marseille to bring drugs over. And a lot of times they bring them over in cars, kind of like they did in the movie that they showed. But yeah, there wasn't, I don't think anything where there was like a family that was like, let's say out of Palermo or something that would be here. I don't think there was really like offshoots so much, but nothing I've read so far. But then again, I feel like as much as I'm learning, there's still more things where it's like, oh crap, you know, like there could always be something we don't know that's exposed years down the line, you know? Like I feel like no matter what, there's nothing that I'd be like, oh crap, I know everything. Hell no. I said, I think there's always more to learn about the mob. I said, I still think, despite the fact that I kind of get bored with John Gotti, every now and then I'm like, hey, there might be something new. You know, there could be something,
sure.
you know.
Yeah, the reason why I was even like kind of like asking those questions or going that route is like, I mean, I guess I'm kind of even like thinking about what's going on today. And like people are worried about like all these illegal immigrants coming over and causing all this crime and destruction. And it's like, well, look at the mafia. Most of them probably, or at least half, were probably legal. You know what I'm saying? So it's like you don't actually need illegal citizens to come into this country and kind of fuck shit up if you think about it. And then, just like a lot of people, when they come here, they start sending money back to Mexico. Some Italians or Sicilians are sending their money back to their country.
Yeah.
Like if it, in some sense, and I know I've said this before, I mean, I would consider some of it possibly domestic terrorism, really.
Yeah, I agree.
And it's like, you know, we're seeing like, it's just funny. Like, I mean, I'm not downplaying the border. That's an issue. I do think it's a huge issue. But it's like, yo, like you don't need people who are legal in this country to actually start causing chaos and not even realize it. Unfortunately, the movies had made you kind of glamorize it so you don't think much about it anymore.
Yeah, exactly, right?
Yeah.
That's wild. Question, Phil, for you. Kind of going off of what Nick was getting at with like immigration and whatnot. How, in your opinion, has the mafia, or as a Sicilian mafia specifically, influenced America? Has it influenced it in a positive way at all? In some extent, negative, like just in your opinion, from your research?
I think, you know, there was, like in Sicily, it started as almost kind of like, you know, that idea of a men of honor. But I think from its beginnings, that even that was kind of like a mislabeled term. Like, I think there was people who started that sort of brotherhood who were in the beginning just right out to kind of just start making, you know, profit off of it. Like, I'm sure there is some benevolent aspects to it.
Mm-hmm.
And then you come to the United States and, you know, people always talk about, you know, there was, they say before the mafia, there was the Black Hand that was Italian and whatnot, but they were extorting, you know, shop owners and, you know, ransoming and all these other things. I think that there was a respect between, you know, for the Sicilians from the Americans, but I think after a while that kind of became a little bit like they don't know what they're doing, you know, because for a while, to be honest, the Sicilians, what they were involved in, a lot of it was like cigarette hijacking. Like they kind of stuck to certain things. They didn't really get involved in drugs until the 50s and the 60s and exploded 70s and 80s. Like I think that first Mafia war, which ended in a car bomb that killed, it was like 7 cops. So they kind of had to, like people started kind of going underground and things like that. It was cigarette smuggling, cigarette hijacking. But then 70s and 80s is when it got bad, and that led to the second Mafia war, which was, like I said, is bad, blood in the streets and everything. It was, it wound up leading to one of the biggest defectors against the Sicilian Mafia testifying in the Pizza Connection case, amongst others. And there's a guy named Tommaso Buscetta, and I think they found him in Brazil, and they had killed 2 of his sons, multiple brothers. I mean, they were doing anything they could to try to find him and kill him, the Corleonesi. And one of the people he testified against was another Sicilian mob boss, a guy named Gaetano Badalamenti. He was considered a loser in that mob war against the Corleonesi, but he was indicted for his role with respect to the heroin smuggling. But yeah, I think there was like some respect, but I think it was a little bit more kind of just like, you know, we're doing things bigger sort of aspect to it. But, you know, I think as time has gone on, I said, you know, Sicilians are still going strong, and I don't even know what they're up to so much every now and then, you know, except when they capture, a lot of times it's a fugitive Corleonesi boss who, you know, that seems to be kind of the pattern. You know, these guys turn up after years being on the run. And there's a guy named Bernardo Provenzano. He was like one of their most feared bosses. They capture him. They're like, he's the boss of bosses, you know, anytime these guys are caught. And it's like, that's a term that supposedly was done away with a long, long time ago. But I think due to the power they hold, it's back in vogue again. And I said, Sicily, I mean, we could talk about the mafia, and then we could talk about groups like P2 and that sort of connection between, once again, what's P2? A possible Freemason, you know, a Freemason group, whatever, that's powerful. And, you know, the amount of stuff, I mean, Gladio. I mean, so much stuff that went on in Italy in the 70s and 80s. And I mean, shit, I think it's probably even still happening today. How much the mob figures into that? Are they just hired guns, or do they have more power than even our wildest dreams?
I have brought this up as, I have wondered, Phil, like, could there actually have been like some sort of connection between like Gladio and the Mafia here? I just, sometimes wonder if there was a correlation in some way, because I know those were kind of like almost like if you domestic terrorist pockets that you were going to activate when you needed fucking something done. And it's like, I mean, you had fucking pockets of them around the United States in their own little ways. And it's like, I don't
Sleeper
know.
cells of mafia.
Yeah, where it's like, how do you know like everything that you're being portrayed, like of why these people got killed and whacked? Like, how do we know these things are all like not bullshit stories? You know what I'm saying? And it's just like, well, they're running their things and they're making their money. And when we need people killed, they do it.
Yeah. Well, what better way
we need to strike fear into people. We need to strike fear into people. Go kill 7 people today. So when it's in the fucking news tomorrow, people are scared.
Well, you
never know.
Books, I always have a book with me just in case I can refer to it. So a book like this, Handsome Johnny, about a guy named Johnny Roselli. Johnny Roselli was a guy who wasn't from this country initially. I think he winds up going to Boston at a point, but he was born Felipe Sacco, and I think he left because of Sacco and Vanzetti. Like, I don't think he was related, but because of his last name, he wound up moving. He winds up going to Chicago. He is in the outfit there. He's connected with like the Capones and the Frank Nitties and all those guys, Tony Accardo. And then he gets sent out to Hollywood and becomes like a Hollywood film producer and, big name and everything, Vegas too. And then at some point, he's asked by a cutout with the CIA to help kill Castro. And then at some point, you get guys later on who say, oh, you mean Colonel John Ralston? Talking about Roselli. Like, so this guy's being introduced as a colonel, like on military bases, kind of like some people said Mohammed Atta was popping up before 9/11 as a colonel in certain areas.
Oh, wow.
I think a guy like Roselli could have been someone like that, someone who was kind of like maybe saw as a greater purpose, or they were using him as such. And in the end, though, he was disposable. I mean, he winds up, they get him he was running some sort of card counting scheme at the Friars Club out in LA, with the old time comedians and everything like that. And they're going to deport him. And he starts talking to the newspapers about, a plot to kill Castro that backfires and results in a couple of Cubans, conspiring with Oswald to kill Kennedy. So you're like, well, is that real, or is that him trying to help deflect, the blame off, the scrutiny of the Kennedy assassination while also helping himself? And he winds up testifying in front of was the church committee in 75, and then he goes for a meeting with Santo Trafficante, and then a short time later disappears, and then they find him in an oil drum off I think it was Biscayne Bay, 1976. His death led to them forming the House Select Committee on Assassinations to look into the Kennedy assassination again. Because like, how many witnesses have to be killed? Because it was him. He was killed a year after Sam Giancana. Sam Giancana was supposed to testify in front of the church committee. The feds were going to take him the next day, and they find Giancana shot 6 times around his face, and they said it was an insight, it was someone who he allowed into his house, and the guy shot him to death. Yeah. And there's a guy named, if you ever get a chance, I think I've mentioned it to a couple people, a guy named Al Carone, Carone, who was actually like a New York guy who was at one point a New York cop. He was a war vet, World War II, CIA, and knew some mob guys, and later on was like, they were saying was connected to like the Contras, like Contra activity. He knew Oliver North, knew a lot of these guys. And when he died, his daughter wound up suing the federal government, saying that he was involved in a lot of like covert activities, drug running, and at one point even reached out to Ted Shackley, who was the blonde ghost, they called him, of the CIA. He was like one of the higher ups in the CIA stratosphere, and got her father's headstone changed because it wasn't acknowledging his war service. But yeah, Carone was another guy. I mean, I think at one point they said he was rumored to be in Dallas in '63. Put him amongst many, but
That's funny.
put him there with Woody Harrelson's dad.
Right. Oh man, I wanted to ask you, Phil. I guess you gave a couple good examples already, but like, just if you know, or in your opinion, like how has the American Mafia influenced American politics?
Whew. The sort of beneficial relationship they had with like Tammany Hall in New York. I mean, you can't overstate that enough. They had a very hand-in-hand relationship with picking candidates and things like that. Chicago, I would say even more so. The Chicago outfits influence, and they'd call them the aldermen. Like they'd run the wards, the various wards. One of the guys, I believe, was a made man who was like an alderman in Chicago. It was a guy named Pat Marcy, but it was like, I think his name was like Pasquale Marchese or something like that. These guys ran the city. I mean, I've gone back and forth on, with the mob and Kennedy and how much influence they did have. I mean, I don't think Joe Kennedy was a choir boy. I think he was definitely mob connected, bootlegging and in the movie studios. Did the mob help get Kennedy elected? Maybe in Illinois, wouldn't surprise me. I'd look at Texas, and that's more where LBJ was. And, LBJ, I mean, you can go mob, but you can also go with Texas oil men and, military contractors and pretty much anything else, a different aspect of organized crime. But I think the politicians depended on them to a certain degree to get out the votes, and would use them in certain labor things like, big business would. Sometimes you needed the mob. I think, you're friends with them up to a point when it starts to hurt you. Then obviously you push them aside. Barry Goldwater, the Arizona senator, had some mob friends, and it didn't help him in the long run. One of them was a guy named Willie Byoff, and Willie Byoff was a pimp. I think he was a murderer too. He eventually gets involved in the extortion of the movie unions. It was the International American Theatrical Stage Employees Union. They were running, like they basically took over the union. It was him and a guy named George Brown. And when the scheme came undone, they got like the higher ups of the Chicago mob. They got Johnny Roselli, they got a guy named Paul Rica, and Frank Nitti, who instead of going to jail, goes to a train yard and then shoots two shots in the air, one that kills himself. I think they said he shot two to try to say that it was him doing it, which I don't know. I said, so I guess that's what Gary Webb was doing when he shot himself twice. I don't know. But, sometimes it reads better to say, he shot himself. I don't know. But Byoff testified against them, and then he goes to live in Arizona, and he's known as Willie Nelson, which I always thought was kind of funny. And then he goes and makes friends with like some of the high, the kind of the hoi polloi of Arizona, but then apparently forgets who he is, goes to Vegas, and where he's recognized by Gus Greenbaum, who runs the Riviera. Gus Greenbaum took over the Flamingo after Bugsy Siegel was killed. And Greenbaum's like, oh, hey, how you doing? He's like, yeah, guess who just walked into my casino? And Byoff would go back to Arizona, where he'd get in his car one morning, start up the car, and then they'd find pieces of him in the tree very shortly thereafter.
God.
Yeah.
Pieces in the tree.
Like some Mo Green stuff.
Yeah. Well, and then Gus Greenbaum was a person who had to be, he took over the Flamingo and ran it really well, because the Flamingo hadn't started off great, because Bugsy Siegel or Virginia Hill, Siegel's girlfriend, were skimming, and Green Bob would bring it into the black, and then he'd retire, and then the Riviera was losing money, and the Chicago guys were like, "Hey, you mind taking this over?" He's like, "I have no interest," and they're like, "Okay." And then Green Bob gets a call, "Hey, your sister-in-law's been found dead." And then the next day he picks up the phone. "So I'll take that job at the Riviera." And then he was, I guess, snorting like a lot of heroin. And then they're like, "I think it's time you step down." Nope. And then they paid a visit, and they found him and his wife dead, out in Arizona. They were slit both their throats. Yeah.
It's crazy.
Mob's got a long memory. It depends. I was always waiting for the day with someone like Sam in the Bowl, where they put him out in Arizona, where his name is Jimmy Moran. And I remember, because my cousin lived out near where Gravano was. He's like, "Yeah, I tried going to his restaurant, and they shut the place down, like it was like a private sort of thing." And then they get Gravano for running an ecstasy ring with like neo-Nazis and his kids, and I think some Israelis too. That was like 2000, 99, 2000.
Neo-Nazis and
Israelis. It's interesting.
So an interesting side note to that. So Gravano admitted to 19 murders, and he winds up testifying that, and he only winds up serving 5 years for that. Because I remember like the big New York Post thing, 19 murders, 5 years, and getting, Gotti and all these other guys was the greater good. And then when Gaspipe Casso from the Lucchese family turned, who was like going to be even a bigger rat than Gravano, he's like, "Yeah, Sammy sold drugs." Well, the FBI didn't want to hear that, because according to Sammy, he never sold drugs. So eventually they tore up Gaspipe's deal. Gaspipe winds up going to the Supermax in Colorado, where he died during COVID. He died in 2020. And then Gravano gets busted for drugs anyway. They were worried because that might have invalidated his testimony at like every trial he testified at. Yeah.
Okay, question. Okay, if this is the outcome of the mob life, you just most likely end up dying. Why do most people get involved, do you think?
Sometimes it's, generational.
Generational. Yeah.
It's the allure, when that scene in Goodfellas, when, he's looking across the street at the cab stand and he sees these guys in the suits and the nice cars, that spoke to certain people, like that life was there. And once you're hooked, you're hooked. You don't question the being found in the trunk of a car, or, being carted off to possibly do the rest of your life in jail. I think it was the glitz and glamour. You maybe just kind of don't. I think, the gold is in your eyes and you don't see it. It's like Vegas. When you go to Vegas and you think you're going to win right when you get in, and it's the allure. It's like, okay, it's the Scarface line. First the power, and the money. No, the money, then the power, then the women. Like you think you're going to get these things, and then it's like, all right, you're still living with your mom. And I said, and you're not making that much.
Right.
So it's
Speaking of Scarface, okay, I don't know. Did you guys watch that Griselda special that just came out?
I have not seen it yet. No. With what's her name? Right, Sofia Vergara.
No. What's her name?
This lady I'm thinking of.
Sophia.
There's been plenty of other
Sorry.
ones about her, right? I think I might have seen one.
So it's about Griselda. I forget her last name, but she
Blanco.
was like,
Griselda
Blanco.
Mm-hmm.
And she was a huge cocaine dealer in Miami. Blah blah blah. Did the American mob ever get involved in that, or is that sort of just like a Latin American thing down in Miami, or like with cocaine specifically?
Cocaine, it's weird. So in a lot of the stuff I had read, the cocaine wasn't really spoken about, except the guys getting hooked on it.
Using it.
It was more of the guys seem to have gotten involved in heroin, or you'd hear the Sicilian name, they'd call it babanya, or junk, get involved with the junk. heroin, I think, was considered more profitable. Yet, I have read a couple books. I mean, I've read a couple books that mention people who might have been connected and with connections higher up to like your Gambinos and stuff like that. And there was, I think it was like a deposition I had read years ago from a guy who was like Contra connected, and also the October surprise with Reagan and Bush, a guy named Richard Brennicky, who was a Contra pilot, who said that he brought drugs up for John Gotti. That was connected to like the cartels and like Mina, and that there was a Mina, Arkansas Gambino family connection. Said, wouldn't surprise me, but I said, I don't know. Like, you hear it once and then it never be brought up again. But most of the time it was heroin. Like heroin, I think, was like that consistent thing you had, whether it be the pizza connection, whether it be, you had a guy in the Lucchese family, Matthew Madonna, who was connected to Nicky Barnes. And, Nicky Barnes was a huge, huge heroin dealer, or who, I don't know who was really connected with Frank Lucas, the American gangster. But, there was always some way to get it, but cocaine, you don't really hear it as much. Like, I think
guess because of where cocaine comes from, mostly. I guess that's the Latin American, like they've got like a monopoly on it, sort of.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know. I thought that was interesting because I was just thinking, I just watched it not that long ago, and I was like, I wonder if any like Italian hands would have been on that, but maybe.
I like the Cocaine Cowboys. I think that's actually where I first heard Griselda Blanco's name, was the Cocaine Cowboys. Mm-hmm. And but yeah, no, cocaine for a while. Like every now and then when I'd read a newspaper article about the mob, because I would like, if I saw Mafia, I was like, ooh, picking it up, got to read it. And cocaine was like a very like, almost like an outlier. It's like, it would almost always be heroin, or even marijuana would be like, oh shit, I guess they're into something new. And but I think heroin and meth, there was certain place like Philly got involved with meth. I know that the meth trade at one point. And what's the other one? Steroids. I think they said Junior Gotti and some of those guys would be involved in like steroid dealing and stuff like that. I said, I wouldn't be surprised. I said, especially Junior Gotti's case, because even though how he's tried to make himself out, he still seems like an idiot. Only an idiot would leave a list out of which mob guys gave what for his wedding. I mean, that's pretty stupid.
Every Italian does that. It's the list. I still have mine on a spreadsheet just in case.
I know, but he left his where it's like, come on.
Yeah, I know. That's true. That's funny. Oh, man.
There was a time, I would actually wonder, like, I think maybe it's kind of like what you were getting at, Teresa. I would wonder, like, you would think when, like, that whole cocaine thing started exploding here.
Yeah.
They were somehow going to have their hands on it and either get involved in it or somehow tax it or regulate it. You know what I'm saying? Like, to at least, or distribute something. I just wonder, like, if that was even, like, could they have, when they started selling their drugs, were they getting it from that?
Well, so part of the whole thing with the mob has always been, and they talk about it in The Godfather too, even though it was obviously a little bit of Hollywood license or whatnot, was nothing a mob boss wanted was to, the profits for drug dealing are great, but getting caught and the sentences with it were too much. And again, they've had drug dealers. They've had drug dealers who've been decently placed up. But you had like kind of that scene from Goodfellas when Paul Sorvino says, talks to Henry, and he's like, I don't want you doing that stuff. And he's like, what are you talking about? He's like, you did what you had to do on the inside. Don't do it here. Because he was talking about his predecessor, this guy named Carmine Tremonti. They called him Mr. Gribbs. God only knows where his nickname came from. But he's like, Gribbs is doing 20 years in the joint for saying hello to some jerk who was dealing behind his back. It's not going to happen to me. And, that's what they worried about. They were like, that paranoia that some guy who gets busted for trying to earn a little extra is going to turn and give up the whole thing. And, that, let's face it, there is no honor amongst thieves, and some guys, let's face it, you could have a guy who's not a made guy who gets busted for dealing drugs, but knows enough people up the line, like Henry Hill did. And Henry Hill was busted for cocaine smuggling, cocaine dealing, I should say, and wind up giving up enough people. So there was always like that paranoia to it. It really was just they said, oh, it's deal and die. No, it was deal, get caught, and die. Like they didn't want you getting caught because they knew the sentences were that, large.
Yeah, well, and it seems a lot of the higher profile guys got caught on like way pettier things.
Yeah, I mean, you think Al Capone in the end winds up being tax evasion. You get these guys for tax evasion, but again, some you could get long enough sentences, like the Chicago outfit guys. So in late 70s, early 80s, you have that the Vegas casino, the skimming comes undone, that they were skimming the profits out of the casinos. They wound up looking at 25 years, which was a death sentence for these guys. And it winds up being, who they wind up getting? They wind up getting the Kansas City bosses. They wind up getting a couple guys connected here and there. 25 years. It was death for them. I think some of them only wound up serving like maybe 10 years. And it winds up being one of those things where it's like, man, skimming a casino, who'd have thought? But it's like, yeah, it's the government's charges. But with drugs, I said, yeah, you were looking at probably a life sentence. And it's in the end, the heroin dealing is what kind of led to, in a way, John Gotti making a move on Paul Castellano. That John Gotti's brother Gene and his best friend Angelo Ruggiero were involved in heroin trafficking. And Gene and Angelo get arrested, and Paul Castellano hears there's tapes that they have of Angelo Ruggiero talking on his daughter's princess phone. That's how they've always described it. Wow. And he thought he'd be safe. And Angelo Ruggiero's nickname was Quack Quack. And, they even make fun of it in the movie Gotti. They're like, you dial any number, Quack Quack's on the phone. Like he had a big mouth. And it was funny in the movie Gotti. It's what's his name? I can see him. It's the guy who played Pussy in Sopranos, Vincent Pastore.
Yeah.
He played, and when Castellano wanted those tapes, Ruggiero's like, I'm not giving him the tapes. He's like, I got good friends on those tapes. He also had the fact he was bad mouthing Paul Castellano on those tapes. So Castellano was going to do a couple things. He was going to break up Gotti's crew, probably murder or have murdered Gene Gotti and Angelo Ruggiero, and go from there. And he wasn't even going to have his own family do it. He was going to ask one of the other families to take out Gotti and Ruggiero. So Gotti moved first. So it was a little bit of a proactive move, but at the same time, it was like one of those things where it's like, heroin did it. They said, and Angelo Ruggiero would die of cancer within a handful of years. And Gene Gotti did a sentence and is out. I think they say he's one of the, he's still involved. I think he's still involved with the family, even though Junior's supposedly out of the life. And I think Peter Gotti died. I think out of all the Gotti boys, because I think there was like 10 of them, half of them were in the mob in one way or another, which brings to question about, how some of these guys wind up in there. A lot of them, it is family related, and the Spilotro brothers in Chicago, I think out of like 5 of them, 4 of them were in the mob.
I wonder what the ones who aren't do.
One of them, with the Spilotro brother, one of them was a dentist. I know that. But the Gotti brother, I don't even know. I'd want a different last name.
Right? Like,
it's funny, dentists, like they still robbing people.
Yeah.
They do it through different types of insurance.
Yeah,
exactly,
different means.
Right? That's funny.
With there was a story with when John Gotti went and told Vinny the Chin that he had Junior made. And he was beaming with pride, and Vinny the Chin's like, "Oh, that's very unfortunate. Like, why would you want to bring your son into this?" And some are old school like that. Like Vinny the Chin was more old school. Vinny the Chin was someone who besides the bathrobe stuff. This is a guy who was
that shit was classic.
And they thought he was punchy. Like he'd taken too many hits. And one of the first things he did was, he tried to kill a boss. He was asked to kill Frank Costello. And he says, "This is for you, Frank." Frank Costello turns his head and he grazes Frank Costello's scalp with a bullet. And it was ordered by Vito Genovese to push Costello out of the way. And Gigante leaves town. They eventually get him. He's up to like 300 pounds when they get him. and which is quite a sight because anytime I saw Vinny the Chin afterwards, I think he looked like maybe 170 soaking wet. You know, he was not a big guy, and he looked like, you know, the uncle that people didn't talk about, sort of thing. And you know, the guy who mumbling and walking through Greenwich Village, being led through by a helper.
It was like a Kaiser Soze move.
Oh yeah, totally. I mean, meanwhile, his one brother is a gangster and his other brother is a priest. His brother, his brother, the priest, just passed too. Louis Gigante, I think, just passed this past year. But so Gigante comes back. They do the trial. Costello sticks to Omerta, says, "I don't know who shot me." And then afterwards, Gigante shakes his hand, says, "Thanks, Frank." And you know, Costello retires and is able to actually go out on his own in that way, his own terms, even though interesting factoid, years later, Costello's mausoleum would be blown up, and it turns out the guy who did it, Carmine Galante. Like, it was supposed to be like a disrespect, you know, sort of thing, blowing up his mausoleum. Costello, whose real name was Castiglia, but he went with Costello because figuring Irish gave him a little bit more clout, was you know, they used to call him the prime minister of the underworld. Like, he was the politically connected guy. He was the guy who could lie low and, for the most part, avoided the scrutiny that a lot of these other guys had until they brought him in front of the Kefauver hearings in, I think it was 50 and 51. And he got them not to show his face, but they showed his hands. And you could see his hands and how nervous he was. And even though later on they'd have some shots of his face on, like, not live TV, but like, you know, the highlights. And one of the senators was like, you must have something you've done that something, you know, legitimate or patriotic you've done in this world. He's like, paid my tax, you know. And yeah, Costello was a guy who, like, in the end was just like, he kept the power he had. The shooting was 57, which was a turbulent year for the mob, because that's where you had Appalachian and you had Albert Anastasia's death and a lot of crazy stuff. And then I think he died 73. So he was like, you know, like, you look at I'd seen a movie years ago, Mobsters, not one of the best movies, entertaining, but not really truthful. And it was like Christian Slater, Patrick Dempsey, and Richard Grieco as, you know, Bugsy Siegel and Lucky Luciano and Meyer Lansky and all that. And out of the four, it was Costello, Lansky, Luciano, and Siegel. And it's like, Luciano died in 62, heart attack, on the way to meet a film producer. That's the story that's been told, in Italy. Bugsy Siegel gets killed in LA at his girlfriend's house. You know, they shot his eyeball out, amongst other things. Costello dies in 73, natural causes. Meyer Lansky lives till 1983. Dies natural causes. Might have died one of the world's richest men, but we'll never know, because they say, despite how smart he was, that he lost all his money when Castro took over the casinos in Cuba. Which I'm like, not if you've read enough about Meyer Lansky. I don't think that's true. Said I think the guy was smart and had more money lying around.
Jeez.
Yeah. So it's yeah, the Mafia to me is always an interesting subject. I mean, and the more we learn, it's like there's still more. Like, there's been talk that there was a boss behind the boss in Chicago. That there's like someone behind, like your Sam Giancanas or Tony Accardos, and I've seen the name every now and then. I'm like, all right. I said, I'm willing to buy that. I said, the Chicago outfit was huge and had power. They said pretty much they controlled everything from Chicago and then west of the Mississippi. So that anything any other family did, Chicago made the call on that. You know, whether it be LA or they had San Francisco had a small outfit, and so did San Jose. I mean, I think in the end they said there was like 25, 26 Mafia families.
Wow. It's not small.
No,
I wonder too, like, the connection between the Mafia and religion, or like spirituality. So, like, we were hinting at the structure being similar to like a secret society or a military, or even like the Vatican, let's say, like the Roman Catholic Church. Obviously, being mostly Italian and what we're talking about, I would assume a lot of mobsters would have been Catholic by baptism, or just family tradition. But is there like instances where like the mafia is directly like infiltrating the church for some purpose, or do they like use each other? I know there's been some cases with the Vatican, and I believe Vatican, but Godfather 3 was based off of that, no?
Yes, that was based off of the Vatican Bank, and the guy who was running it, a guy named Paul Marcinkus, who was the Archbishop, was from Cicero, which he liked to tell a lot. And even though he wasn't Italian, this is a guy who like has been described as being like a gorilla. I mean, he was a huge guy. And the Vatican Bank, I think, was definitely being used as a money laundering, aspect. And Marcinkus might have also been a pedo. I mean, that's there was a Netflix documentary about a young girl. It was called Vatican Girl, actually.
Vatican Girl. Someone just told me to watch it recently.
Yeah, it was. I think it's like a 4 or 5 part about a girl. I think her last name was like Orlandi or something like that. But her family lived in Vatican City, and she was only like 15 when she went missing. I think it was 1983 she went missing, and they still haven't found her. And there's been hints that maybe Marcinkus was involved, if not other gangsters. But Marcinkus, so what happened was when John Paul I became the new pope in 1978, he winds up being dead within 33 days.
Yeah.
And his death is shrouded in mystery. And they didn't do an autopsy. When they found the body, they said, oh, it was his heart. Meanwhile, like the last checkup he had showed he actually had low blood pressure, like not high blood, like not the signs of a heart attack. And someone said they had seen that there was certain things Albano Luciani, Pope John Paul I, was going to do. One of which was he was going to get rid of Paul Marcinkus as head of the Vatican Bank, and even have the Vatican Bank audited. Like there was going to be an internal audit. That definitely represented a huge issue, because they show in the end that in Godfather 3, the Pope gets murdered. And they say he's got far powerful enemies than anybody we've seen. I think, Mafia, possibly CIA too. And Gladio, that could have been so many connections to that. Godfather 3 is underrated. I think people just shit on it because Coppola's daughter was in it.
I love Godfather 3.
They give it the favoritism. I said, you know what? If you don't put her in it, it's still a pretty good movie, I think. And I like the story behind it.
Good.
Yeah.
That's funny you bring up the murder. Well, I think it's a murder of Pope John Paul I. I literally just watched a video all about it. And I just got a book about it. It's called Murder in the 33rd Degree, based off the video I watched. It's amazing. But yeah, it's a whole plot that the person who wrote the book insinuates that Freemasons were behind the murder.
Okay.
So I wonder too if there's like a mafia connection to Freemasonry, also, especially Italian Freemasonry, like in Italy specifically, because there
was a P2 Lodge comes into that.
Yeah. There, I think the mafia Freemasonry in Italy has a direct vendetta against the Catholic Church. So I think they are very much like at war with each other, and that Freemasonry has infiltrated the Vatican at very high levels purposely for sinister plots such as installing popes that they might like more than others, such as maybe the current pope. But that's just a theory.
I can't stand the current pope so much.
He's a problem. But relating to that case specifically, there's a lot of evidence that, yes, Pope John Paul I was murdered, and it relates to Freemasonry, which is really interesting. So,
In God's Name was another book that was really good that I read. That was actually the first book I had read about John Paul I being murdered and the mafia connection, but by a guy named David Yallop. It was really controversial too when it came out. But also just a quick intersection with the mafia in New York. You had the San Gennaro feast. The San Gennaro feast is like a huge thing.
I've been there.
You have the thing with the religious, like we had one in Island Park that was smaller, but the one in the city, which I've always wanted to go to, and you got the religious figures with the money being put on them and stuff. The mob had been involved with that for years.
It's so funny. Like by the time I had went to one of those, I was like already like, probably later than most people. I was like in my mid 20s, I think. And even when I went, I mean, when I saw them like walking this thing down the street, like some of their things, I was like, yo, that is like real extra for like religious. Like to me, I was like, if you just gave this person this thing that you created and everything that people have attached to it and put around it, if you just like change that person's skin color or their clothes, how different is it from like a voodoo fucking setup?
You're right.
Like what the fuck?
Well, those festivals, I'm assuming I'm not from New York, so I don't know, but I'm assuming the San Gennaro festival is probably very much like what happens in Italy with there's a saint festival. That's what they do. They carry the statues around on their shoulders and are like throwing all this stuff at it. They do it for in August. It's called Ferragosto, which is for like the Virgin Mary. It's a holiday there, like it's a big deal. Like every town has their saint and they carry the statue out and it's like a whole thing. I've seen it in Malta, like where my husband's family's from. They do the same exact thing and I think it's wild. I don't get it. To me it feels blasphemous, but like this is a cultural thing, right? So
well, I mean, Long Island, the boroughs.
I never understood it. I was like, what?
Long Island, the boroughs definitely have their weird things going on anyway. Like, I think, don't we have Coney Island? They have, like, that mermaid parade once a year.
Oh, God.
And I'm always just like, how the hell did that start? Like, if you really think about it, every year we got people who dress up as mermaids and, like, have a parade in Coney Island.
Well, yeah, what is it? Mermaid Avenue.
I'm just like, how did that, like, what's behind that? Like, what the?
There's got to be some story behind that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Right?
For sure. You had mentioned a name before, and if you don't mind, well, if you don't know anything, maybe we'll just kind of wrap it up here. But I mean, I was going to end it with this question, and I'm hoping maybe you might have a little bit of information about it. I think you mentioned Cicero before, correct?
Mm-hmm.
The reason why I wanted to ask you, if you knew more about that is because a while ago, God, this is going back years now. When Lux was on the Occult Rejects with me, he did want to try to cover the Cicero family that was like involved kind of with like the Golden Dawn in a sense, because he did think that they were actually like linked to the Mafia as well. And we did kind of like look into it a little bit and found some stuff, except like the only problem was like there was two sources we were finding information about it and it was a copy and paste. So we were both like, we can't find anything else that at least like kind of like almost like different stories but can corroborate whatever. We weren't comfortable with using that to cover the topic. We wanted more than one source, to use. And but like, do you know anything about like Cicero's like kind of being like involved with organized crime?
No,
There's that one person you mentioned.
Well, just Marcinkus being from the area of Cicero, and
for some reason I thought you had mentioned a Cicero because I think there was a Cicero in New Jersey that might have been.
Of course, like I said, they used that was Paulie's last name fictionalized name in Goodfellas was Cicero, even though in real life it was Vario. But I think they probably just permission-wise they went with Cicero. I mean, there could be something there that they're maybe using it in certain alluding to in fictional aspects, but Paul Marcinkus was from the area, Cicero, which I think is where, that obviously was a huge Chicago mob stronghold or whatnot, but now I haven't heard that, no.
I even wondered, like, if that even goes back to, like, Marcus Cicero, sometimes, like, even taking that name.
Yeah, because it even just be like a customary name that you give yourself for some reason, right?
Yeah. Especially like the reason why I was mentioning Marcus Cicero is if you have an occultist, you have to like then really question like what's the reason your name is that even your real name?
I think the Mafia organized crime. There's always going to be that they're going to connect with conspiracy and other aspects of they pop up. The mob pops up in Son of Sam tangentially in one way or another. Manson. The octopus story. There's so many things where they pop up. So I think they're always going to be there in one form or another. But if there's a deeper aspect, trust me, I'd love to learn more too. But I think
sure.
Just based off the fact it is what was once a secret society, I said there's always going to be things that we're still like I said, we're still going to be finding out years from now and be like, oh shit, you know.
We may know it exists, but the way it worked is still secret to most of us. So,
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Exactly.
Yeah. Thank you very much, Phil. That was a really awesome. That was like an awesome chat. I really enjoyed it. For real, that was a lot of stuff I didn't know, and it was just really interesting. And Teresa, thank you for asking so many great questions and chiming in.
Yes.
Yeah.
Thanks. Yeah, it
awesome.
was great. Thank you.
Oh yeah. Do you want to plug your show real quick and let everybody know about that amazing podcast you have?
Sure. So yeah, of course, the Spiritual Gangsters, also co-hosted with you. We do Clown World Weekly every Tuesday morning at 10:30 Eastern AM, not PM. Yeah, where we just like go over current events and make connections, go through all the crazy together. And I also have a new podcast gig, I guess you could call it, Midnight Mysteries, which is a Canadian paranormal radio show. I'm on their Things That Go Bump in the Night segment. So it's really cool topics. We've done so far sleep paralysis. We're going to talk about the Mothman soon. Yeah, it's really cool stuff. So if you guys want to check that out, let me know.
Awesome. Very nice. Very nice. I was hoping you were going to plug that Midnight Mysteries.
I remembered for once.
Yeah. And another thing, I know you don't plug it too much, but check out her Etsy shop for her hats. You know, pretty gangster. Actually, next Tuesday when we go live, I will be donning my the new one.
Mafia fun.
The new one that she sent me. It's actually really fucking nice. So yes, I'll be showing that off. Yeah. So her links will be in the bottom. If anything, have you added the Midnight Mysteries to your link tree?
You know what? Literally, as I said it,
you're thinking I gotta add it to my link.
I was like, I gotta add it to my link tree.
Well, so by the time this comes out, it will be there. So
exactly, yes.
So definitely go check that out. And interesting, I'm really interested to hear the Mothman. Believe it or not, in some of some paranormal stuff like that, when you start getting into cryptids or these beings, I don't really entertain too much. But for some reason, I don't know why Mothman. Again, I even think there could be something deeper behind it, but Mothman definitely catches my attention. I don't know.
It's a weird one. It's not one I would have normally looked into.
Right, yeah, but for some reason...
I researched it only for the show because it's a giant insect bird man, like gross. I don't want to learn about that. But honestly, I'm glad I did because the story is really crazy. So
I think another thing that does it too is, I don't think you've ever seen Hellier, right?
No.
I do think that it was a deeply encoded actual show. And it kind of starts off mainly on the Mothman idea. So even just that, I think it piques my interest of why'd you choose Mothman? In a sense,
It's a crazy one.
Definitely go check that stuff out. And Phil, thanks again. Do you want to leave anything to people get in touch with you? Maybe on Twitter? You want to leave your Twitter handle or something?
Vic Foster is my Twitter handle.
I'll
I
add
try
that.
to post any of my book reviews when I do those, and because those are frequently, and every now and then I get to do conspiracy ones, which are nice. But I might start just doing some of those on my own, in addition to the ones that I get paid for. But yeah, that's pretty much there for now because most of the social media I'm not really on anymore.
Yeah,
for the most part.
I don't blame you, man. Better off.
No.
Yeah. You'll be a lot happier and probably productive.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Awesome. So I'll leave your stuff in the bottom. And again, what was that besides my show? I know you were on Colby's, you said, and where else again? Just
I've done a couple with Conspiracy or Just a Coincidence with
that's right.
Jack Allen.
Yeah.
I've done Secret Society of Good Guys with Cheney, and I did one. I'm gonna forget his name now. Crap. I had done another one last year with Ajit. I forget his name. Ajula. It was one that was more slightly. We did conspiracy, but we also did kind of career-wise because I was telling him I was a book reviewer. I think it's Amit. That's what it was. Amit.
How did I not get that?
Yeah, we did last spring. It was nice, but yeah, I think I've done Jack Allen show 3 times. I've done Colby's a couple.
Nice.
Done yours now, so. Yeah, it's
so I guess even if they were to even probably type your name into Apple or Spotify podcast, you might even come up on a few other shows. So that could be a way to go check out if other stuff he's done. Yeah. All right, so I'm gonna wrap that up. That is the end of another Occult Rejects, and until the next one, everybody be well. Later.